GitHub Copilot is a very powerful piece of technology. It's an assisted AI coding plugin that you can use in Visual Studio Code to help you go faster. Actually, you can use it in a couple of different ways. You can write a comment and see some output and accept that output if possible. As you're typing, you'll see some suggestions on how to produce the code, trying to get the context on where you are and what you're trying to do to give you useful suggestions. Now, this goes beyond what we've seen in the past, where you would have something like a snippet, like a generic snippet, like say for example I want to create a class or I want to create a simple function, and you'll get like a simple scaffolding for creating and building that function, but kind of like in a generic way. And where Copilot shines is that it understands the context, the project that you're working with, what is it that you're trying to do. And even though sometimes it doesn't get it quite right, you will see the abilities that it has to try to adapt as you keep typing, as you move forward with what you're trying to build, to give you more accurate suggestions. Now, let me show you a couple of things that you can do with an example project, and let's put all of that into practice. Let's go through some of the steps that you will need to understand to use GitHub Copilot and enable your AI-assisted coding in Visual Studio Code. It's actually very exciting to see it working. We'll see some of the things that we have to do here. So I have an example repository. It's Codespaces project template pi. It also happens to be a public template. That means that you can actually copy the contents, similar to forking, is essentially copying all of the contents here to your own account. So you can definitely do that and follow the steps that I'm going to be doing today. So this is the repository, and I am going to create or work with a Python HTTP API with Codespaces and Copilot. Now, it's fine if you don't know Python. The steps that I'm going to be doing here are more specific to Copilot rather than the programming language, Python that is. I'm going to go through some of the steps, make some things happen, make some changes, and see how Copilot is going to help me out. Now, I'm going to start this with Codespaces. I haven't signed in, so if you've not signed in, you'll have to sign in so that you can enable the Codespaces or run it from there. Alternatively, you can clone it to your local desktop and make sure that you have access to the code there. But before we go into that, let's take a quick look how we can enable Copilot for students. If you're a student, you'll get to use this benefit for free. To get it for free, you'll have to follow some steps. Here you make sure essentially that you're setting up your GitHub student account, and then that you follow these steps right here. You'll need to go into education.github.com/pack, and that will start the verification process using your email from the institution that you are attending right now. So if you've followed all of these steps and you're completed everything that is needed to activate that, well, you can go to your settings, and I'll show you here in the documentation where that is. You'll go to your settings in your account, and then in code planning and automation, you will click on Copilot. So once you do that, and I'll show you right here, you'll see the GitHub Copilot there at the bottom, and then you can accept the benefits. So in my account, that means that I'm right here, personal account, and when I click GitHub Copilot, well, I have that already activated. And if I go to billings and plans, you will see that GitHub Pro, which is the same benefits that you will get, is if you are a student, you will get the 180 hours for Codespaces, but you will also get Copilot essentially for your account without any costs. All right, so now that we have those details out of the way, we are going to go to the actual repository and start making some changes. So I have the repository loaded, and you will notice the first thing that you will notice is that I have Copilot enabled right here. So because that little symbol is right there, if I click it, it will say, hey, do you want to disable? No, I don't want to disable it. I want to work with it. And you'll know that that's working. You need to make sure that you have the extension installed. I had the extension pre-installed. Now this repository has that configuration for Codespaces where it will be automatically installed. If you don't, you'll have to go to extensions and say GitHub Copilot and search for that, and then install this one right here. You can see again that this is already installed. That's why it says or change the button changes if I want to disable it. So I know it's enabled, and we'll start to now work with it and see what how can it help me out. So I'm gonna close this one. This is the example README. I'm going to close this one too and open the File Explorer. So for this project, what we're gonna do is gonna launch up the terminal, and I am going to run a command to start the application. Now these instructions are already part of the repository. I'm not gonna go into details about the application itself. The idea here is to show you how these will work with Codespaces and Copilot. So I'm gonna run Ubicorn, which has been pre-installed. Actually, if I do -- help, it should tell me, it should give me the help output, which it does, so everything's working correctly. So I'm going to say ubicorn -- host 0.0.0 web app .main : app, and I'll say reload. So let's explain very quickly what is happening with this command. What is going on there is that I am going to run a Python application, a Python tooling that is a web server. It's called Ubicorn. It's been pre-installed. I'm going to specify what the host is. That host is 0.0.0.0, meaning it will bind to any IP address of the current environment where I'm in this case, is Codespaces is in the cloud, so it will bind to anything. And it is in the web app. That application is in the web app directory in the main.py file, and the application is called app. And that's why you see it right there. And -- reload means whenever there's a change, it will automatically reload. So I'm going to run this and see what happens next. Well, it's started up. Now, Codespaces will probably tell me, hey, there's something running on port 8000. Do you want to open it up? Sometimes it might take a second. You can see here in the ports, it will show up here. If it doesn't show in the terminal, that's fine. You can always go to the ports. And now let's take a quick look at what that, how does that look in the browser. I'm going to click that one. It's going to open. Well, finally the message popped up. It's fine. I already opened it, and it's right here. So this is the one. It's a containerized Python API. It has, I can try it out. There's a project source which points me back to the repo. That's perfect. And now we're going to start making some changes with Copilot now that we have that running. Again, the instructions on how to run these are right in the repo. So if you're wondering how to get that started, don't worry about it. Now, again, we have the terminal running here with our application. You can see that my request was seen by the running web server. Because I closed the terminal pane, it doesn't mean that everything will go away. It will stay running. So I am going to close these to show you what we're going to do with Copilot. Now that we have Copilot enabled, we're going to go to web app, and this web application has a little bit of Python, but it also has a little bit of HTML. And because it's Python and it has a little bit of HTML, we're going to be working with a couple of these different things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're going to make some changes to that HTML file. So I'm going to go to static, and I find my index.html file. I'm going to open, I'm going to double click so it stays there. And I'm going to close this to make this a little bit bigger so that you can see the changes as I am going to start typing. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to look, I want to make this dynamic. Did you see how these buttons are kind of like static? They're not doing much. They're just staying there. The project itself has the ability to, I'll show you here. It has like the API has a generate. It will generate a token. I can send something with JSON. So I want, instead of like going to this page and generate and see the response, what I want to do is I want to go here and try it all from there. So I want to add something dynamic. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to go here, going to go to the index.html. I'm going to find where that button is. So let's take a look. Well, it's right. So it's right there. So I'm gonna make some changes here. You can see there's a project source button. Now I'm going to start with creating a comment. Now a comment is a way of a prompt. You're giving a Copilot some instructions, and this is how you create a comment in HTML. I'm going to make some space there, some room so that I can start typing. I'm going to start typing, and while I'm typing, Copilot might start giving me some suggestions. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create an interactive form. So create, I know what I want, so I'm going to start typing that, and it's interactive form with text input and button, and we'll need to add an event listener. I'm going to keep typing here to button to send a post request. We're going to send a post request to what endpoint is going to be the /generate endpoint, and display the response in a new div. Like the div is the actual section of the HTML that we're going to use that, and we have to say with the ID of result. So I'm going to hit return, and you might see that Copilot was turning. So try to pay attention how that will start spinning, and nothing happened here, right? Because the comment was done there. Now, this is not going to be the same for anyone and everyone doing Copilot. Your response might be slightly different. That's fine. Actually, if we go back and we hit return again, you can see that the GitHub Copilot is spinning, but that doesn't matter. We are going to start kind of like directing or showing Copilot where we want to go. So I'm going to say form ID, and then suddenly we are getting an actual suggestion. This looks okay, and you'll see that we'll get the input of text and then the button. That looks fine, so I'm going to hit tab and accept this, and then that will end up the form, and then it will start generating more of the things that I want to do. Remember, I wanted a div with the ID of result. Well, that's one, and I'll keep accepting that and keep going forwards. Now, I waited there a second, and now you can see there's a lot of JavaScript generated with comments that is explaining exactly what I need to do. Actually, I'm going to make it slightly smaller so we can fit it in. So that's it. That's the whole thing. This looks kind of correct to me, so I'm going to hit tab to accept it. I'm going to scroll the way down. I think I need to close the tag. Very good. Copilot accepted that and suggested that, and that looks correct. And I'm going to save these. I'm going to save these change. And you, if remember when I launched the server, I used -- reload. So let's take a look at terminal, bring that up, and take a look at these. And it didn't seem like it did reload. If it didn't, we'll to see our changes actually reflected in the application that we have running here. I'm going to reload these and see if our new button is showing up. Actually, it does show up. You can see very rough. I mean, I'm not a very good front-end developer, but this looks kind of correct to me. Now, let's try and add something there. Hopefully it works out and talks to our backend API. So I'm going to put some text here, and I'm going to click generate, and I'm getting an undefined. Okay, so some things are happening. We just don't know exactly why. Now, this is one of the interesting aspects of Copilot, where it doesn't always give you exactly the right answer. We need to go fast. We're able to go fast, but we're not going with 100% the correct answers all of the time. So let's poke around and see what's going on. So let's go back to our application. Things we did send a post to generate. If you remember, I'm gonna open up a new. I'm gonna duplicate this tab, and I'm gonna open up the API. Do you remember there's an API? The API is on docs, and if I go here, you will see that there's a get, there's a post, generate. The generate endpoint accepts a post request. So we need to figure out what is the right way to interact with this API. It says that it's JSON with a key of length and an integer of 20. So that sounds good. And if I do that, I'll get a response. Let me see, try it out. So now we have to do a little bit of debugging of what's going on. So we're going to say execute. This would be the example curl request, and the output is going to be JSON with a key of token and the actual token. So let's see what's going on. Let's go back to our HTML and the thing that generated, the Copilot generated when we asked to get that button added with that input form. Now, the first thing that I'm spotting here that is not quite correct is the fact that the JSON input is not quite correct. Remember, it had to be length and not name and input. It was length and then an integer, right? So we'll need to change these and say length and then an input, and then the placeholder should be probably updated to say placeholder enter a number. So there we go. So I'm gonna save that and gonna reload and see if this will change. I'm gonna say enter a number. That sounds correct. I'm gonna say generate. Now this is still undefined. So what's going on? Why is it undefined? Well, if I go back to the application, we'll see that we also need to consume the output back from the API, right? So if you remember, the length and input is the right way of sending something to the API, but we want to have the actual response as a token. Token is the key, and we are not actually looking at the response with the actual key that we wanted. So what we need to do is actually tell Copilot that what we want is we want to fetch the results from generate. So we'll see where's the where we're going to generate here. So it's going to fetch and generate. That's fine. Now you can see that the response here is the response JSON. That's okay too, but then it's not doing anything with this response, right? So it's not doing anything with the response, and we need to get that response, that token, inside the element. So what it's doing over here, it's introducing the result. Remember, there's a div with result. We're going to get that information there, but there's no data.message, right? Like there's no message coming in from, so this needs to be updated. So let's quickly change that to token. Save that and try the API again. So I'm gonna reload, I'm gonna say 12, I'm gonna generate, and now I'm getting a successful, you can see there's a successful response right there at the bottom. So that's pretty good. We're able to dynamically send something to the API, click on generate, and get a token. Now this changes if I do something like 15, it will get longer. If I do, 80, that will get even longer. Now we're generating tokens on the fly. Perfect. We're actually making some things work. Now, if I go back here, you will see that our code that was we were able to introduce with GitHub Copilot was able to do things almost right. We still need to have an understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. In this case, I do know there's certain things that are behind the scenes, and I need to do certain things. The input has to match length and input. If I do something else, it won't really work. And the result had to use token, which is the key from the JSON that is getting on the response from the web server. So that's very good. And we were able to kind of like hint to Copilot with a comment on where to go and what to do. Now, what are other things I can do with Copilot? Well, we can actually open up this again, and we can also interact with Python. So in this case, we have the API here, and we also have the ability to create a different endpoint. So in this case, it was generate, but what if we want to do something slightly different? So what we can do here is we can add a new endpoint. So I'm going to say And we can do these. We can do these two ways. We can do this by generating code with a comment. So in Python, a comment starts with that character at the very bottom. As you can see, actually, I'm going to close these. And we can say something like create a new endpoint. I don't want to serve static files. I want to actually compute the hash value of a string and return it. That sounds good. And so you can see that it will start generating the code for me. So there's definitely, you can do that. And as you hit tab and accept what it's coming in, that looks kind of correct to me. So I'm going to do this and then save it. Now, this means that we'll get a post, and that sounds kind of correct. But the way this works is that we really need to have something like this, that this is basically a model that defines our input, so that we are not allowing anything else. Now, this is wrong because body is using length as a key and an integer as the value, and we definitely don't want that. So now instead of using a comment to generate the code, I'm simply going to create a different class, and I'm going to start typing and let a Copilot send me some suggestions. I'm going to say class, and I'm not going to call this body because I need to have a different type of name there than line 17. So I'm going to say hash body. I'm going to inherit from base model, and I don't want length though, so I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to say text, and I'm going to say string is fine, and that should just work. And I'm going to save. Now I'm going to say the hash body, I'm going to reuse it right here at the very bottom, and I'm going to say this is going to be hash body, and this is incorrect. So the example request body is going to be text hello world, and now you can see that it has the context. So that's one of the interesting things about Copilot, that understands the context. So I didn't have to tell it much so that it could understand that this is exactly the type of things that we want to have here in the documentation. So it's not only generating code, but it's also generating documentation in the form of a docstring. This is in Python, this is called a docstring. It's non-executing code. It's something that we can use to document our functions and our API. So that is pretty interesting, and we can actually see if it works, because remember, this is a dynamic application. We can go back to our running application, and we can say we want to try it out. We can go here, and now you can see that hash is already there. It accepts a post. Let's try it out dynamically. We'll say text string, and we'll try to execute, and we'll see if we get any errors back. So we did get an internal server error, and we'll have to try to debug what is going on. So we'll go here, back to our terminal, and we'll say we want to see what is going on, and hash body object has no attribute length. All right, so it seems that I forgot to change something over here, which is the length of the object that came in here as a hash body. Remember, we changed that. That means that it is not body that length, it is body that. Let's see if you remember. Take a second, and you'll probably see that this is a string. So let me show you why that's that string. Well, actually, I got it wrong. It's that text. So let's actually remove this and see if it suggests text here. So it didn't suggest. That's fine. That's what we need, because the body, that text, will have that string coming back to us. Now, if we go back to our application, so we're going to use this again and try to see if we're going to get an improvement. So let's see if we can try it out. Text string looks okay. I'm going to run that, execute that. Oh no, we're getting a HTTP 500 again. No problem. Let's quickly check our terminal, and our terminal says, whoa, we have some problems here where we're decoding. No problem, we can definitely change that. So we'll just need to continue to debug this to try to get it just right. So there's two ways of doing this. I know that what it's complaining about is that this is trying to use it as the length. That's not quite right. And what we need to do there is, instead of using UOS urandom64, we want to use body.text right here. So that looks fine. You can see that the application reloaded below as I was making the changes. The coding might work here correctly. So let's just try it out again. So I'm going to click execute once again, and now I'm getting a 200, and finally this is working. Now I did have to make a very quick update to this, and this is the final change, which is B64, that B64 encode, and I had to encode this as a bytes, and Python is kind of tricky sometimes with UTF-8 and encoding. And Unicode, it's kind of tricky, but this is the one change that I had to do. Now I had to type that out. And definitely you can do the same thing with comments and prompting and making some changes. But when you're debugging, well, essentially what you want is make sure that you have a solid understanding. So how does our application look like? Now, if I go back here, I'm going to say cancel, and I'm going to say, you're going to see that we have now three endpoints, and we have the ability to, well, not this one. Let me see if I close that one. You'll have the dynamic generate button so that we can try it out. So there you go. That's a way, a solid way where you can use a little bit of Copilot. That is, if you remember, it is right here at the very bottom, trying to help us out, go faster. It doesn't matter if you're writing HTML. It doesn't matter if you are creating a little bit of comments or typing as you go and generating some suggestions for you. And you also need to remember that sometimes, well, this is not 100% correct, but it allows us to go so very fast, like in this example, writing all of these JavaScript for us. Now, again, this is not 100% ideal JavaScript, because like ideally you won't put this chunk of JavaScript inside an HTML. But hey, I wanted to go fast. I knew what I wanted, which was a button, create a form, make it dynamic, and capture that output and put it in the HTML. And it definitely allows you to do that. So there you go. Hopefully you can find Copilot be useful to you and let you do things like these, or some other things as well when you're coding your projects with either VS Code and hopefully Copilot as well.